SDSU Studio Series. In the midst of what is happening in the world today, we've created a series of digital conversations with Broadway professionals where we talk about the craft and the business of Broadway and how we can pass along this legacy to the next generation of musical theater artists. The SDSU Studio Series is organized by the SDSU MFA Musical Theatre Program. This program is one of only a handful of graduate degrees offered in the United States that offer the terminal degree in musical theater. And our graduates are acting, directing, choreographing, music directing, writing, and teaching in university positions worldwide. Our goal is to bring the professional world and the academic worlds together so that students of musical theater are prepared for today's job market. My name is Robert Meff. I worked as a professional conductor, music director, and orchestrator on Broadway for 22 years before moving to San Diego to become the head of the MFA Musical Theatre Program. My goal is that every person who wants to be a musical theater artist is able to access what is going on in the professional world, which led me to creating this series and leads me to my guest, Jeff Saver. Welcome, Jeff. Before we begin, I want to give some expectations of today's discussion. If you have any questions, feel free to use the question and answer function built into Zoom. After my questions are completed, I will ask questions from your submissions. And hey, if you're out there from a university musical theater program, type the name of your school in the chat function. I would love to see who is represented today. So let's begin. Jeff Saver composed the scores for Dodsworth and Time After Time with Stephen Cole, and scored Anne Reinking's documentary film, In My Hands. As a conductor and keyboardist, his Broadway shows include Over the Rainbow, Sister Act, Chicago, Kiss of the Spider Woman, Into the Woods, Sunny in the Park with George, The Secret Garden, and A Chorus Line. He's a graduate and former faculty member of my own alma mater, the Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
It's so good to see you. I was just musing that Jeff and I have known each other for almost 30 years, and it's really great to see your face. Glad you're well. Well, my first question, go ahead.
To say there's a line from the show Chicago, I'm older than I ever intended to be. So,
so the university musical theater community is adapting to the coronavirus outbreak by migrating classes online and providing content like this interview to students and educators worldwide. So how is Broadway coping, and how are you coping?
Well, I think it's obviously difficult for not only Broadway, but anybody who was planning on doing a show. You're performing on a regular basis on a Broadway show, and all of a sudden you're not, with very little notice. And that changes everything. The economics are obvious. I feel like our entire industry is down for the count, and applying for unemployment, like like so many people are in the country now. But particularly on Broadway, for shows that were just beginning previews, like Miss Doubtfire, and there was a new play, a couple of new plays starting off, and you're entering that period of time where you're trying to fix your show and get it ready for an opening and all the things that one hopes for, and all of a sudden you're done. And so it's, of course they have questions, well, what is the future of this piece that's been developed over a period of years sometimes, usually, and just in general, what does one do now? And people looking for outlets. Interestingly enough, Rob, in the first couple of weeks after, I may have mentioned to you, like 4 or 5 former students or performers reached out to me and said, could you please do some kind of a coaching class or something? I'm crawling, I'm ready to scream, and I want to do something, and I need an outlet. And I think a lot of people in our industry are seeking and looking for and finding those outlets, and it's just extraordinary to see people's creativity in putting videos together, mashups of songs. Some of these companies are just something. I think we need that creativity no matter what, and something like this happens, and what do people in the arts do? They throw it into something creative. And so that's kind of cool, but it's been rather devastating,
Sure.
certainly in New York. Yeah.
Definitely. So I want to talk a little bit about your career. You spanned some fantastic writers and shows and things like that. And you were a part of Into the Woods. You were part of Sunday in the Park with George, the original companies, the revival of Chicago, Kiss of the Spider Woman, and even the wonderful concert performance of A Wonderful Life. Now these shows have put you on a first name basis with, you know, Steve, John and Fred, and Sheldon and Jerry, right? And for all those of you listening, that would be Stephen Sondheim, John Kander, and Fred Ebb, and Sheldon Harnick and Jerry Bach. So what can you tell us about each of these musical theater artists that would specifically help us as music directors, myself, and as actors and directors, help us interpret their work as performers and musicians? Do you approach them differently? Just lead us down that road.
Well, first of all, I have to start with what you said. You used the C word, career. And some people are really careful about crafting one. And I was asked about a month ago, or 2 months ago, I think, somebody said, you had quite a career. And I thought, gosh, have I? And I thought, if I have, it's because I potchkeyed it together. All I ever wanted to do was work. And I still feel the same way. So as opposed to some in our industry that really kind of crafted a career, that was not me. I think I accidentally got to work with some really fantastic people, and the phone kept ringing, and I was grateful then, and I'm still grateful. So I haven't really changed much in that department. But in terms of approaching people, first of all, you have to understand that, like yourself, when I was a student at CCM, the Cincinnati Conservatory, I was piano major and a composition major. I always loved theater, and CCM had a great theater program. And I was surrounded by people that now I'm happy to call my colleagues, but we sort of fell in love with the theater, and these names that you mentioned were kind of our gods then, the people that taught us through their work. I never dreamed that I'd get to work with any of them. So as that started to happen, there was always a feeling of, I'm in the room where it happens, long before Lin-Manuel ever thought of them. It still boggles my mind, but they sort of became quickly collaborators, because you realize how dependent they are on your skills. When you're casting something, the first real professional job I had was an off-Broadway show, The Fantastics. And that was Tom Jones and Harvey Schmidt. Harvey's no longer with us, but he was like my surrogate father. And while I was doing that, I ended up subbing for somebody that was very sick, and I was young, and I sight read the score to The Rink. It was a Broadway show with Chita Rivera and Liza Minnelli. It was a Kander and Ebb show, and that led me to John. And John became like a father in many ways, and still is, and I feel fortunate to call him a friend. But some are just they're like people in anything, in any walks of life. Some are easier to hang out and communicate with, and some a little less so, just like classmates almost. But I will say, in working with all of these artists, they are artists, and they are craftsmen and women. And that's what's really helpful with us when you're actually dealing with the material. You get somebody like Stephen Sondheim. Nobody is a better teacher. Nobody is better with words and articulating exactly what he wants. And that is so helpful, because you know what to do. And certain directors, I would say too, people like Hal Prince, who I miss desperately. He was just so clear, and I miss him, and I miss arguing with him. And I mean that in a very positive way, because we're always trying to solve puzzles, and it doesn't matter who solves it, but that it gets solved. And so they're just wonderful, wonderful human beings. Some have little humor, and people like Marvin Hamlish, maybe one of the funniest people I ever knew. You couldn't escape the room without hurting because you were laughing so hard. That's who he was, you know? And yet nobody was faster. He could come up with 10 ideas in 10 minutes and each better than the other, just right there and then at the piano. I'd never seen anything like it, and I miss him. But I don't know if I answered your question, but that's just, each one is its own world.
Well, it is true. Well, I'd like to get specific about some of the work. So, like, how would you, well, first of all, you really do have to tell the story of you conducting Into the Woods for the first time. But so after that story, I would love for you to tell us how you approach coaching a song like Moments in the Woods. You know, let's say you're doing a new production of it, and you know, where do you start? But first, you got to tell everyone the story of you conducting it for the first time.
Well, like most of my jobs that have happened, that was an accident, a fortuitous accident. I think I was in between jobs, or I might have been doing something that I wasn't. I don't remember exactly, but I remember I was doing a demo recording with Sheldon Harnick of a show that he was working. It might have been Wonderful Life, or it might have been Dragons. Those are two pieces that that obviously he did lyrics for, but he also did the music for Dragons. And we were commiserating about something, and I think he mentioned something to Steve because Steve was looking for another conductor, unbeknownst to me. For Into the Woods. And the reason that was happening is, oh yes, I remember now. I was working on a chorus line. I was doing the show. I had taken a leave of absence to do Lynn Ahrens and Steve Flaherty's first show, Lucky Stiff, came back to chorus line. And Sheldon, I think, mentioned something to Steve because Paul Gimignani has been for many years, since A Little Night Music, I think, Steve's main conductor and someone he loves and admires, and rightly so. And Paul was going to be music directing Jerome Robbins' Broadway with Jerry Robbins, and Scott Frankel was the assistant on the show. I think most people know Scott from his scores like Great Gardens and Warpaint, but he was the assistant conductor of Into the Woods at the time, and he and Paul were leaving to do Jerome Robbins' Broadway, which was going to be rehearsed in the day, so they needed somebody to conduct matinees. So I literally was walking by, it's the Hirschfeld Theater now, but it was the Martin Beck Theater then, on 45th and 8th. And Paul was standing outside, and I said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm working on chorus line." He goes, "Want to come over here?" I said, "Yes." To do what? Turn new pages? And he says, "No, we need another conductor. Can you learn the synth book really quick? And then we'll throw you up to conduct." And this was surreal that this was happening. And I said, let me work on that. So I whatever my day off was on chorus line, I sat in the pit, watched. I played the following evening. And within a week and a half, I was up and conducting the show. Thanks actually to the guidance of Scott Frankel, who took me through every inch of the score, let me know everything from where the French horn entered to where Joanna Gleason sniffed to what Tom Aldridge did. You wanted to know basically everything and anything you could possibly do. And gratefully, I got up and nobody got hurt. And eventually I was asked to take over the show. And I'll never forget that morning, because at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, I don't believe anybody could call a musician at 8 o'clock in the morning on any day, but particularly a Sunday. And it was Gimignani, and he offered me the show. And then Jim Lapine called an hour later, the director and librettist of the show. And then an hour later at 10, Steve called to offer me the show. It was like the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. It was bizarre. And we didn't actually run that long. We only ran a little under 2 years, but I actually conducted the show longer than Paul did, just by default. And it still blows my mind that that happened. It was one of the fantastic experiences of my life, and a beautiful show.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes. So, so the second part of that question is, let's say you have a song like "Moments in the Woods." What do you tell your actress? How do you start to get into it, and where do you go from there? What's important about it?
The question really is, what's not important about it? You're talking about one of the great detailed writers. Nothing is arbitrary. Not one note, not one word. There's not a wasted moment, but it's very important. There are some general things that the way I approach a song anyways that do apply to a moment like Moments in the Woods, because the actor has to be aware of who is the character, what does the character want, what does the character need, and what just happened. Those are probably the most important things. And she literally has just, in this case, been jilted by a prince, and she's married. So you have a situation before word one, and he basically says his bit, and you've got this vamp going on, this music, this magical music that's happening, a beautiful E-flat major seventh happening, really just arpeggiated. And she turns around and says, "What was that?" And just that alone is a one-act play. And then she asks all these questions, and she doesn't know the answers to them. And remember, songs are they're only about 2.5, 3 minutes long. Whereas if you were writing this down on a yellow pad, you'd write pages and pages and pages of what was that. And you'd write it in your diary or your journal or whatever, but we only have a little bit of time to get so much accomplished. So knowing that the audience is probably not going to get everything the first time, it's the actor's job to understand every single moment. No pun intended. And she needs to be responsible for each question. Who's she, and why would she ask these questions? Did a prince really kiss me and kiss me and kiss me? He says it 3 times, and it's not arbitrary. And did I kiss him back? And to be able to sort of monologue it in not being seduced by the rhythm of the music. And again, one of the great things that Steve does is he's so cognizant about where and how music sits, the words sit on the music, to allow the actor the process. He actually gives the actor, as though they were improvising the scene, as though there was no music whatsoever, the space to be able to feel these two things. And this particular song, one of the things I really admire, one of the many things I admire about this song, is that there are 2 sides to the brain. And because there's a moment where she says, "Wake up and take responsibility of my life, back to my life, and be organized and do the things that a wife and a mother's supposed to do, back to my pragmatics." And then she starts saying, "Why not this though, that thing that I just did?" And the music is different, just like the character. So if you're saying it in Japanese or any other language, you would still understand it because of the music is telling you a different story. Each time there's pragmatic and there's lush. And again, she asks, why not both? And isn't that the dream? And also, you're choosing, of all songs, Rob, you're choosing one of the great theater songs of any show ever. It's just, it accomplishes so much. And the actor has so much to do, so many questions of what, because one of the questions an actor asks is, what do I want? They automatically get to be the most selfish person in the room. And ironically, the more selfish they are, the more we get in the audience. Because they're trying to fix something, they're trying to solve something. And she does. Now, she says, "Now I understand, and it's time to leave the woods." And it has a nice little stinger, and everything works out. I put it together, and I'm ready to go back. The only bad thing is that she dies. It's always a bad thing. But other than that bad bit of luck, the actor is so has accomplished so much. So when the actor figures out what the song is and what it gives, at the end of the day, if you have a living composer, you should write that composer and say, thank you for giving me such accomplished work. It makes their job so easy. And I should say too, when it's Steve, you're not even getting the song until the 8th or 9th draft.
Right.
Because you might be surprised to hear how insecure he is about, he loves the writing process, but when he has to give it to the actor, that's when he gets really nervous. You wouldn't think it, but he goes, oh, he thinks things like, oh, they'll think it's direct, but we got to make a living and all this stuff. And that should tell you something about, you say, how is it working with these people? That's the humanity part, how vulnerable they are, and how you have to take care of them and support them. And maybe in a larger sense, take care of each other. That's what Into the Woods is about. Community responsibility and parents and children.
Oh, I love what you're saying there. I think everyone, myself included, and maybe people listening too, there's a point in your life that you just feel like a fraud, you know, that you're insecure, and the idea that Stephen Sondheim has that moment of feeling like a fraud, I think makes me feel better, and I hope it makes everyone feel better.
We all say it. John Kander says all the time, someday they're going to find me out.
Right.
They're actually paying me to do what I love. What's wrong? It's going to fall to pieces any moment.
Right. I think that the best wisdom from that, and I love what you're sharing here, is that you keep going, right? You know, you don't let that voice that says I'm a fraud stop you from creating, from playing, from acting, from playing a part to directing. Like you just have to keep going.
Well, it's easier said than done.
Sure.
And maybe it's really good to talk about this in a time of a pandemic, for goodness sakes. Who could anticipate this? This is unprecedented. But sometimes you do, Rob, and sometimes you don't. I'll give you an example from the show you brought up, and the baker loses his wife, and he can't, and he runs away. He does the opposite. He does not go forward until he can. And until his father gives him unsolicited advice, he goes, or agrees with him, like the kid that says to his parent, "I'm going to run away," and they go, "Okay, I'll make you sandwiches," you know, and he goes running away. Go to it. Trouble is, son, the farther you run, you know, the more you feel undefined, and he's got to come back to it. So in order to come back to his responsibilities to his child, and to try to put one foot in front of the other. Is it the right thing to do? It's what we do. Yeah. Nobody said it was easy.
Right. That's
So,
true.
Yeah, we have to be very patient with each other, especially now. Yeah.
Especially now. Well, Into the Woods is of course a special show for a lot of people, but I'm reminded of my own daughter, who saw one of the revivals of it when she was very young. She was probably 8 or 9 years old. And I asked her what she liked, and she said, "Yo, I loved it. I thought it was great, especially that second act." And I said, "Charlotte, the second act?" She said, "Yeah, Dad, that's when everything falls apart."
Oh my God. Well, first of all, I adore Charlotte, and I adore her for saying that, but how interesting that you say that, because one of the experiences I had, one of the strange things about this show, at least the original production, was there was a passerelle behind the conductor. Usually we're right up against the thing, and it's hard to explain to somebody that doesn't conduct shows, but you can feel your audience, and it's different animal every day. You're the other actor in the room, you're the other collaborator, and I never see them, but there's a scene that happens near the end of the show called "No One Is Alone," which, again, how important is that? We all feel so alone right now. And it's a scene, and there was, you know, and I think they were the two parent figures, Chip Zien and Kim Crosby, who played the baker and Cinderella, were saying people make mistakes, fathers, mothers, and my eye somehow spied a little girl in the front row, and saw one little tear. And I thought two things. I thought, focus, be where you are. Don't lose it here. And I thought, I'm holding this little piece of wood here, this stick. There's so much responsibility every time to be present, 8 times a week, because somebody is affected, and you don't even know it necessarily. You can't, because you're in the story. So she and her mother spoke to me afterwards, and I said, "Did you enjoy the show?" And they said, "Which act did you like the best?" And they usually say the first one because it neatly wraps up. But in this case, she goes, "No, the second act." She was like, "Charlotte."
Yeah.
And I said, "Really?" And I said, "Why?" She goes, "Because it was the truth." And I thought, oh, I think I must have said something like, "You must have saved gobs of money on therapy later," or something. I don't know.
That's amazing. That's
Very,
amazing.
I can't believe that Charlotte said that. And you brought that memory back, and I haven't thought of it in, what, 30 years? I don't know.
I love it. I love it. Well, I want to switch to another Sondheim show, which I know that is dear to your heart, and talk about Sunday in the Park with George for a moment. Can you lead us through Finishing the Hat? Like, what do you tell your actor about that song?
You know, I gotta say, when you're dealing with great material, much of the time you don't have to tell the actor a lot. Honestly, I like the actor to work it out for themselves. I am that teacher that frustrates actors probably because they say, "Well, what would you do?" I'm not on that stage. You know, the actors are the crazy brave ones, not me. I get to keep my back to the audience for the most part. But with a song like, I mean, first of all, you're talking about probably the most autobiographic piece maybe ever written, but certainly for Mr. Sondheim. There's just so much in this piece that is so deeply embedded in him, more than any show he's ever written, because it deals with the craft. And no song, again, you pick these songs, Rob. Finishing the Hat, I should tell you first that long before I had anything to do with it, I hadn't been in New York very long, and one of my classmates and former colleagues from CCM, Joan Walton, sister of Jim and Bob, invited me to the workshop of Sunday in the Park with George at Playwrights Horizon. It had nothing to do with it, and it was just a good chunk of the first act and maybe 2 songs that were written in the second act. That's all that Steve had. And they were presenting this work. And it was Mandy Patinkin and Bernadette Peters and many, but not all of the original, what became the original cast on Broadway. And I should say too, also, in case people don't know, that Steve had such a devastating experience with his previous show, Merrily We Roll Along, that he wanted to quit. I don't know if you knew that. And Jim Lapine gave him a different point of view, and there were no commercial constraints on the piece now. It was just being done as in a workshop at Playwrights, which is not the way Steve was accustomed to working. He was mostly had worked in the milieu of Broadway and commercial theater. So this was a new way to work for him. And it took a lot of pressure off him. And isn't it ironic that he created this very personal work at that time, at a time that he was so vulnerable and ready to throw in the towel, and then he creates something like this. And I happened to catch the performance where he had just written Finishing the Hat, which I found out afterwards. He had just played the song for Mandy, and Mandy said, "I want to do it. I want to do it today." You know, Mandy, he's like, you can't argue with him, or you don't want to. And he insisted on it. He goes, "Let me learn it. Let me just go." And he held music. He held the sheet music. And it was the first time I happened to be present, the first public performance of that song. And I don't remember it. I just remember the tears. So I was awash. That's what I remember when I first experienced it. So then I figured it out later. But again, what was the moment before? I sound like a broken record. He's looking through sketches and things he's done because he's trying to create this painting. And every painting is a different organism. And so you're trying to figure it out. Just like Steve does with his shows. And it's like, what are the things? What are the elements in which I need? What is the vocabulary of this piece so I can get it right? And he's looking for sketches. And then he puts the pad, it's using material from this vamp that came from a sequence called The Day Off. So everything is interlocked, everything is related, because that's what the sequence that he just came out of. And then all of a sudden, these two chords, I'm not at a piano right now, but these two beautiful chords that unite the piece. They're in the first song, Sunday in the Park with George, and we hear them here. We hear them before lesson number 8, and we hear them all. And we hear it in Everybody Loves Louie. Mm-hmm. So they become signature, and the audience doesn't need to necessarily be conscious of that, but it brings you home. It's something that we understand. And he immediately goes to there and he puts the pad down and he says, yes, she looks for me. Good. Let her look for me to tell me why she left me. I'm getting choked up just. And then he says, as I always knew, she would. I had thought she'd understood. They have never understood, and no reason that they should. But if anybody could. Do you know how much is just in that verse? It tells us how he feels. And he's not one to express his feelings often. But here he lets down his guards and right in this little bit of music. And when there is motion, Michael Starobin, who is his first Broadway show, uses clarinets in a soft way to get into so he can just think about it. Because what do I do with love? I'm trying to balance my work and my relationships, and I can't do it. And I'm trying. They have never understood, and no reason why they should. It's like, why does anybody know what we do in the middle of the night when we're trying to figure out music and the actor and the words, and it's like, should it be a G sharp or a G double sharp? And do you think said no show ever closed because it was a G sharp or a G double sharp? But these are the details. And as Mr. Sondheim says, God is in the details. And this is what we do. We drive ourselves crazy. No reason that anybody should understand. But if anybody could, I wanted her to understand. And which leads him into, no, I couldn't do it. I couldn't take you, Dot, to the Follies because I had to finish the hat. He keeps saying. And then he talks about what it takes to finish a freaking hat. And he gets into the world of the hat. So you start looking at just the images of what he's talking about, but the music becomes hypnotic. I think he wrote it in F, but Mandy sang it in G flat, but it's this beautiful, these beautiful colors. It's hypnotic and it puts you in a state, and that's what it feels like. And I thought, oh my God, that's what I feel like when I'm writing in the middle of the night, because you keep writing and you get to be in the what I call the ookie bookie hours, where nobody can bother you. The phone doesn't ring. We didn't have internet back then. So few disturbances and you get lost. And it was perfect. And then he varies and he talks about when the woman that you wanted goes, well, I give what I give. Then he resolves it for himself somewhat to keep working. He says, but the woman who won't wait for you knows that however you live, there's a part of you always standing by, mapping out the sky. This is what I do. And then he shows the dog that he printed. Look, I made a hat where there never was a hat, which leads all the way to the beginning of the second act, because they say, they knew, they were jealous of him because he'd be around long after everybody. After we're no longer. What is there? What does Steve say in the second act? He says, what I leave behind is children and art when we depart this world. And he firmly believes that. And I remember seeing an interview with Diane Sawyer on, I think it was 60 Minutes or something, where she asked him, she caught him unawares and said, did you want children? And he said, I did, yes. He goes, but art is the other answer, and I firmly believe that. And so you probably got more than you bargained for with that answer, but it's chock full. So the actor has to be, once again, aware of every single beat of it and where it is and how he can stop. He's got to go through the the mechanics of what I do. And that's what that song does. It gets into it, studying the world of the hat, entering, stepping back to look like going in and out of a window, and what the creative process is for anybody that puts pencil to paper and makes notes or sculpts art or makes anything. He spoke for scientists. He spoke for everybody in the most personal, beautiful way. And what a gift.
Yes.
And that I got to be present and in the room. Come on.
That's great. I love what you bring up about that, because I was fortunate enough to do the national tour of the show, and really realized that the second act is so pivotal to the show, and that pivotal to the second act is the number Children and Art. And I don't think I would have understood it if it hadn't been for the amazing performance of Wendy Brown, who I know you know.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, you want to talk about, not that I have favorite lyrics, but there's a moment in the middle of that song. And I remember, I don't know if people are aware, but when that show went into previews, Children and Art hadn't been written yet. And lesson number 8 hadn't been written yet. And he brought it in and sang. And when he sang, he was looking up at the painting and said, "The child is so sweet and the girls are so rapturous. Isn't it lovely how artists can capture us?" Which is a question. And then the music continues. He goes, "Yes, it is, Marie." And I'm thinking, rapturous, capturous is very clever, but it's a soft rhyme. It doesn't jar the ear. And lovely is the perfect word. And I thought, here I am in the presence of a theater artist at the peak of his game. I can die now. It's enough. It was enough for me. I remember thinking that.
That's amazing. It really, really is.
Extraordinary.
But I mean, I'd love to move on for just a little bit, because you certainly have a long relationship with Sheldon Harnick and Jerry Bach too. So, but probably your approach to their work, is it informed by their creative process? Is it the exact same? What's different about it? Like, can you take us through something like "Dear Friend" from She Loves Me, or even "I Couldn't Be With Anyone Else But You" from A Wonderful Life?
Well, you know, there are certain tools that you learn. Because I don't think I have any original ideas. I've stolen from everyone. Beginning with one of our teachers from CCM, Oscar Kosarin, who was one of my great teachers at Cincinnati, and a longtime music director who music directed many shows on Broadway, including 2 of Kander and Epps' shows, The Happy Time with Goulet, that was right after Cabaret, 2 years later, and 70 Girls 70. When he left, that closed very swiftly. I think it was 1971, and he went to Cincinnati to start the music theater program. But he gave me a lot of tips, and one was be organized. And part of being organized is being prepared. So to really do your homework. So by the time you get in with the cast and you're teaching something, I wanted to know, at least if it was a new piece, what had been written. I wanted to make sure I understood anything. And I was no longer shy to ask a living writer, questions if I didn't understand something, if I didn't know what the intention of a word was or something like, because how am I going to teach that? I'll be guessing. And I have a living writer. I can't ask Rodgers and Hammerstein. They're not here. And it frustrates me because I would. And I know that somebody like Oscar would give me a very succinct and an answer that I might feel of course that's what it is. Why didn't I get that? But he's not here, but Steve is. And Sheldon, again, very astute, a great first-rate lyricist. And people, so the answer to your question really is yes, the same but different variations on a theme. Like Sheldon writes so many things that are close to him. Like the song "She Loves Me," for example. We were doing auditions for A Wonderful Life, which we did at the Arena Stage in Washington, D.C. And a singer came in, he's singing, "Oh, my teeth ache, dun, 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 dun." And I start laughing. And so the actor leaves the room, and I turn to Sheldon and I go, "My teeth ache?" And he says, "Well, you know, when I see a pretty girl, my jaw gets tingly," and he starts trying to defend himself or whatever. And I'm thinking, you're crazy, you know? But a song like I Couldn't Be With Anyone But You is, here's a perfect example. He wrote this song with Joe Raposo. And it was a moment that in the film, It's a Wonderful Life, that the piece is based on, a little throwaway moment. There's a moment in the second act or later in the film where um, George Bailey meets with Potter. He goes, have a cigar. And he's trying to suck him into working for him. And he goes to shake his hand. He goes, I wouldn't work with you. He leaves. He goes back to that Granville house. It's fallen apart. He goes up. Mary is sleeping. And she wakes up and he says something. Jimmy Stewart says, why'd you marry me? And I think she says something in the film like, I didn't want to be an old maid. And that was it. And they took this moment. He writes like a little music box, Joe Raposo. And it comes in very conversational. The first lyric is, come over here. You're not near enough. It gives her something to do right from the get. And that's when an actor wants something to do to make it active. You're not hearing. And he said, I couldn't be with anyone but you. And then she explains. And she actually goes through the process. And there's a sense of humor that Sheldon's, very much a sensibility. She says things like, I serve you steak that's practically inedible. How patiently you chew it. I don't know how you do it. For that alone, you can almost hear the fiddler voice there. You know, it's that Jewish sensibility. And I'd have to be crazy to change that. Then he says, so come over here. You're still not near enough. I guess I haven't made it nearly clear enough. I feel safe with you and complete with you. I'm always finding money in the street with you. And he says, that's Margie, his wife. She's always finding money in restaurants and cabs and whatever. You steal from life. And what I love in the song is you would think of some little silly ingenue moment, but it's really true. You have to play it true. And she goes, I couldn't be. I know because I've tried. That means that there have been others. And it's not others, it's you. And there's only one thing to do in the song is make him feel better. Take care of him. Put the Band-Aid on. Find a way to do that. Because an actor can't play 3, 4, 5 things. You'll dissipate the moment. You need to find 1 or 2 things to do at the most. And if that can be your driving impulse, I have to help him. And to be able to use this song in order to be able to do it, then you keep it alive and real so we can move on to the next moment legitimately. That's what you want to do in a theater moment. And Sheldon does it so beautifully. There is no greater craftsman. And in fact, I just did a concert with him. He's 95 and he sang most of the concert. And
of course he did.
And is on top of it and ended the concert with his wife, Margie, singing, Do You Love Me? The only change was after 55 years. It's nice to know. Yeah.
Wow. That must have been extraordinary.
No words.
Yeah. Well, I got to work on that show with Sheldon at Paper Mill. And
oh, wonderful.
One of my memories of him coaching that song, which gives you an idea of the kind of precision that lyricists have. There's a lyric in it. It says, I don't want to change the status quo, right? Do you remember that? And our actress was singing the line, don't want to change the status quo, because generally we pronounce that phrase status quo. And he said, no, it has to be status quo. First of all, because that's how it's pronounced in Latin. And second of all, it mirrors the rhyme from change. So change the status quo.
The way it's said. Yep.
And that's how specific and precise people are about writing lyrics and expecting them to be done. It was a remarkable moment.
You're absolutely right. And it also maybe leads me into the future a little bit in terms of, I lose patience sometimes with lyricists today that are lazy, that have false rhymes and stuff like that, don't think about all the things because they think they can just get by. And that's when the actor has to work harder to make things work. But when you're given a song like that, the actor says thank you, because so much work has been done for them. And I don't like the should word. But I rarely use it, but a lyricist, it's a very difficult craft. That's why I don't do it. Uh, but, but they should take great care to help the actor, to help this moment, to realize these moments. And you're talking about people at the top of their game, Sheldon Harnick and Steve Sondheim. They they don't take themselves so seriously, but they take the work very seriously, you know. So
Yes, of course. I want to move on to another fantastic pair of writers, and kind of do the same thing. How would you contrast something from Candor Neb, like dressing them up from Kiss of the Spider Woman, or something like All I Care About Is Love from Chicago? Very different style, but what's your approach?
wow, isn't it interesting? Each of these shows are such different organisms.
Sure.
Nothing taught me more about how important my job is when I'm conducting, to be the other actor in the room, than Kiss of the Spider Woman. And I have to say that, you know, the book writer, the guy who gets none of the credit and all of the blame, if a show doesn't work, if people say, Little Night Music, Steve Sondheim, do we know that Hugh Wheeler wrote that book? Do we know that, you know, George Firth wrote the book to accompany? Do we know those things? Because without those librettists, there's no basis for the story and no reason for the songs, which is why every time you see Steve get an award or thanked, he always thanks his collaborators. And I have to say, the great, sadly late to coronavirus, Terrence McNally,
Yes.
who I worked with on 2 musicals, The Rink and Kiss the Spider Woman. What he provided in Spider Woman was a very unusual canvas, not like any book he ever wrote. Whether it be Anastasia, Ragtime, fantastic librettos. But Spider Woman, sometimes you'd have those 2 guys in the jail cell and they'd be in the middle of a scene. And when you have an actor like Brent Carver on the stage, attention must be paid, because he will never do it the same way twice. And if you're not with him, you won't know how to get into a song. You will not know if you're not present. You could say that for anything, but not like that, because Terrence constructed the show really weird, where you didn't know if you're going to be in a fantasy moment or what would be happening. He had all these men crunched in a jail cell, and then all of a sudden Valentine needs to find sanity or he's going to lose his mind. And what does he think of? He thinks of his girlfriend, Marta. And in the middle of this cacophony, John Candor wrote one of the most beautiful things ever written, period, called Marta. I think it's Over the Wall, part 2 or part 3. But it's about Marta. And it's the most gorgeous thing. And both are actors in that show, Tony Crivello and then later Brian Stokes Mitchell. Did it so beautiful and so pleasant. And you need to be there with all those men crunched in the middle. I don't even know how to explain to somebody how to conduct a moment like that. You just be present and but with Candor Neb, this is going to sound very cliche, but it usually starts with love. All their pieces tend to be rather dangerous. Cabaret is dangerous. Chicago is dangerous. You know from her first line, hey, get out of my chair. Do not mess with Velma. She will hurt you. And that it's so economic. I can't get over it. But with Spider Woman, it's all about love. It's the only thing that gets him through. And he teaches it by example. He talks it and he walks the walk. And it makes a hero out of somebody like Molina. It has nothing to do with whether he's straight or gay or anything. He never loses his sense of humanity. So if you don't feel that, sometimes I just take it from the craft of it and this and that, but it's like you have to start from that, because you have to stay in that loving place against all odds. And it's, how do you do that? And what John and Fred gave them, gave Hal something to vision, to be able to see it. And Hal Binkley's first show, Lighting, first Broadway show. Later, we were to be reunited on Allegiance that he did with me just after he had lit Hamilton. But it was what he did on Spider Woman, that I'll never forget. I'll never forget the storytelling there. And it was, everybody was on the same page. It was fantastic. But you can't separate any level, because Spider-Woman was an unusual experience. It had played up at SUNY Purchase in a very different version. That didn't work out. Then Garth Drabinsky, the producer, the infamous producer, picked it up and gave them an opportunity to work on it. And they did it in Toronto, then London. By the time they got to Broadway, we were the pickup band. I had no idea about anything of the show and what it looked like. So when I got up to conduct it, the two things I remember was, because Cheetah I had done like 3 or 4 shows with already. I knew what to expect from her, but I wasn't ready for Brett Carver. No, if anybody was born to play a role, it was that man, and the lighting. So I didn't answer your question in terms of Can or Ed, because it's all related. Right. But when I talk to John about the show, these are the things that we talk about. Right. You know, how do we? But it's always the same thing. How do we tell the story? How do we tell this story? And it's dangerous with really, you know, some people would say foul language, but you know, you're talking about a life and death situation here.
Sure.
And they are so embedded in the moment. But I'll give you an example of, you know, with a song like Dressing Them Up. This is, some songs are pure John and some songs are pure Fred. This is a Freddie song. Oh, God, do I miss him. Oh my God. There was only one, and no one else could have written that lyric, because this is a celebration of Molina and all he does. And, you know, every bit of it, Balenciagas, and it tells the actor how to move and gives them a vocabulary. And this is what I did. And you have to love it. You have to embrace who he is and understand who he is to go through all of those images. And John immediately uses this Latin rhythm and da-da-da-da. You're already in this joyous, and Valentine's having none of it, and it doesn't shut him down. I always thought that's Seth Rudetsky. That's who he is. Yeah, like he could do that in his sleep. And ironically, Seth was one of my subs on the show. Sorry if you don't know Seth, but he's a character, and a lovely guy, great pianist. But that was a hard show to play, by the way. But Dressing Them Up is a perfect example of a marriage of music and lyrics. And another thing you should know about Cantor and Ebb, very different from other writers, is they write in the same room, or they did. They always, and they couldn't be more different, those two people. John is so shy, and Fred is so flamboyant, and you put them in the room and it's soup, Cantor and Ebb. And they become another organism, and they can write the fastest songs in the world, you know. Sorry to go on and on, but you keep choosing these great shows, and I just want to do them again.
Of course. Okay, well, so what are some of the people that are writing musicals today that excite you?
Oh, well, I love, God, what you know, obviously Lynn is so now more adventurous, I think. In the Heights, I enjoyed very much. It's really an old-fashioned musical, if you think about it. It's an old-fashioned book musical that he chose to use, because Lynn is a sort of a Broadway baby too. He knows the literature. We actually did a benefit together for Sheldon Harnick, and he, you know, he knows those songs. He can read off every lyric to Fiddler to you, but just taking what he knew of that and his hip hop background and being able to tell a story like Hamilton, and likewise, oh my gosh, I'm spacing their name, like I can't think of Rob Meth, but the two gentlemen from Michigan that wrote
Pasek and Paul.
Oh, thank you, God.
Ben and Justin. Yeah.
Great guys, and again, craftsmen. Really hard on themselves, but to come up, there's just nothing better in the theater than a good idea. Mm-hmm. And Rachel Jones, I guess she goes by Rachel Bay Jones, who played the mom, is an old pal, she used to babysit my eldest when she was little. And I should say too that there's a great example of somebody that for many, many years couldn't get arrested as an actor. And then it happened later. So you never know. You just never know anything. And she sings this song, maybe it's the 11 o'clock number, so big, so small. I mean, come on.
No.
That song, I just, as soon as I heard it, I was like, well, I was messed up. And then I actually had to see Rachel afterwards, which is awful because it's like, what the hell?
Yeah, I agree. I was not ready for that song. I mean, that show took me through everything. And I really thought it was done killing me right before that song happened.
No.
And it's just this little moment, and it's, it's about a U-Haul.
Yeah, maybe it's younger folks that, and I mean this with great love, until you're a parent, you just can't know. Sorry, I didn't know. I thought I knew something, and then I had a kid, and it's like, I don't know anything.
Right.
I know less than nothing. And which is why you have to keep learning. My father used to say, when you're green, you're growing, and when you're ripe, you're rotten. You just gotta stay open. But I texted afterwards, and I thought, home run, dude. How did you come up with this? And he didn't really answer me, which pissed me off. So next time I see him, I said, I want you to be accountable for this moment. How did you do that? And sometimes people piss you off, like Sondheim changed one thing once, and I asked him, where did you guys come up with it? And he said, we worked on it. And I wanted to slap him. It's like, oh, come on, that's no answer. He probably just wanted to hurry up and get a drink or something. I don't know. But John told me once there's a moment in Spider-Woman where it's called She's a Woman. And the guy has just been poisoned and he defecates himself. It's awful. And Melina cleans him up. And while he's doing it, an oboe starts playing and a clarinet. And all of a sudden he sings the most beautiful song called She's a Woman. And John said, I wish I could tell you something really intelligent, but it was just what the moment needed. And you can get just as frustrated. It's like, well, what kind of answer is that? But it's the right answer. I should also say that if you want to know the definition of the L word, love, that we used to call them dictionaries, but Wikipedia should just have a photo of John Kander, because he is just the most unconditional loving person other than my mother. It's just like, it's ridiculous. The kind of love that comes through that man's music is just you can't put into words, but it was right for the moment. And so Pasek and Paul are doing this kind of thing. It's not just writers too. I don't know if you got a chance, Rob, to see The Great Comet. But I had a conversation with Rachel Chatkin, the director. We had on FaceTime or something, and we were talking about things, and I was so glad to get that opportunity with her, because it's like, how did you create that world? That kind of adventuresome point of view of telling a story. There's no greater tool in the theater than your imagination. Probably in just making anything. It's the great thing. And maybe my favorite words in the English language are what if, because once you say that, it's like, it's a blank page. Is what if we do this? What if she was wearing a red dress? What if, and you start making things, and it doesn't matter whose idea it is. As Rob Marshall, who we worked together on Spider-Woman, he once said in a recording session, the best idea in the room wins. And he's right. That's why I'm saying I have no original ideas. I steal from everyone, but I think it's our responsibility to pass it on to another generation. But these artists are doing that. They are finding ways to tell stories in ways I never would have thought of. And I would say to this next generation, that should be your cue to use that as a jumping board to say, how can I tell this story? Not to be crazy. I think it might have looked crazy to us, but that's the way they saw it. I just never thought of it. It was like brilliant. my jaw had dropped at the end of that thing. Even for anything that was wrong with the show, tell me anything wrong about Great Comet, and I'll tell you 10 things right. Things I never thought of. So I was like, wow, I want to write something now. And who wouldn't want to be in the room with somebody like that, with that kind of imagination? Oh my gosh. Even if you fail brilliantly.
Well, it's true. Rachel and I were on the faculty of PACE for a while. So
Oh, wow.
when this idea was kicking around, so it's interesting to see where it came from. But you do mention the students of musical theater, and I want to tell everyone that earlier in your career, you were on the faculty of CCM, and you've also taught at Point Park and UC Davis, and probably many, many other places. So do you know there's been a huge proliferation of programs, BFA programs specifically, dedicated to teaching musical theater, especially in the last 20 years? What do you see as the benefit of that in the professional world? And do you think there's something that's missing from their curriculum, or something that people aren't getting?
Each curriculum is different.
Mm-hmm.
I will just, I'm not great for, you know, how you're always trying to promote a program. I may be the worst one at that, Rob, because something's always going to be missing, no matter what, for every student. I like to tailor. I'd like to tell you, oh, this program is going to give everybody everything they need. Lies, lies, lies. It's impossible. And if you expect it, that's not a realistic expectation. But I will say that what you want is tools. You want tools, and you want to know how to use them, so you can go off in the world. It's kind of like what we do with if you have children, you want to give them the tools, and then you want to entrust them to go on. But keep adding to the toolbox. So no matter any schools or anywhere you are, keep adding, keep learning, keep growing. I mean, these people like Sheldon Harnick, he's in his 90s and he's still learning. So don't ever feel that you have arrived. You know, I don't know what that means. I have no sense of what that could possibly mean. But in the schools that offer musical theater programs, you have to realize that when Oscar went to start that one at CCM, there was no musical theater program. That was the first one. And he's let's try it and let's start. I don't think they knew what they were doing exactly. And so trial and, you know, you fail, you learn, you keep learning. So we've evolved, and now there are so many programs. And all of these things that you need, all of these tools to be singing actors. And even if you're just a straight acting major, doing just Shakespeare or just Moliere or just Terrence McNally, you know, it's all music. I listen to Shakespeare, I hear music, I hear a rhythm, I hear, you know, iambic pentameter, and it's music to me. It's all language. So it's learning these different languages. And if you have teachers and professors that know about these persuasions, what's not to love? What's not to learn? And yet, depending on what's generational, I find that there's never any replacement for craft. So if you're looking for an easy way over or through something in order to be able to get what that thing you think you want, which is what all the characters in Into the Woods do. And by the end of the first act, they've got what they think they want. And what's the problem, folks? It's not enough, is it? Never enough. So what you have to do is figure out what it is that you actually need. And that's a very individual thing, because the thing that a student wants or thinks they need now is not what they needed 5 years ago, and it won't be the same thing that they need 5 years from now. So what do we need to stay wide open to possibilities. What are writers saying today that are important? Yes, you have to be in the pulse of that. So most students today know what Drew Gasparini is writing and what Pasek and Paul is writing, and you know, all those writers. But if you don't know what Sheldon Harnick wrote and Jerry Bach did and what Oscar Hammerstein did and what was accomplished in Showboat, nothing had ever happened like that. And if you don't have some of that knowledge, then you have nothing to build on. and maybe that makes me sound old-fashioned, but I think that there's something to be said for knowing the literature, not thinking, oh, I'm just going to do this and be crazy and I'll get away with it. You won't get away with it long.
That is true.
No, I think that you have to stay wide open. So I don't know specifically because each program is different. I can tell you, when I went to CCM, I would say, oh, why don't we have an accompanying program for accompanists in theater? That didn't exist then. What about a place for writers? What about music directors? What about actors who dance, but with an acting major or a dance major, they're so packed with what they have to do. One of the first things I did at Point Park was a ballet with Anne Reinking. And some people don't know that Annie, who is mostly known for her Fosse work, because we both work with Bob, but she comes from ballet. And Robbins, she did the first National Fiddler. And that's really her work. So we did a ballet at Point Park, and we had musical theater students and dance students audition for the piece. And what it came down to was storytelling. And who can do that in their bodies and vocabulary. And so these vocabulary things are very important. I'm a collaborative animal. I'm the one that's sitting with the lighting designer saying, how does this feel? Understanding the sound department and what we have to create here. There's just no department that you can't know about. And I know most programs, and probably yours, make the students do, you're working with costumes there, or your backstage crew, or this and that. And they think, oh, this isn't what I really do. Trust me. So I don't know, Rob. I don't know that I've answered everything. It's all so important. I think it goes from program to program to say, what do you need? I ask them. I don't assume. I ask a program, what do you need? What do you feel like you're lacking? And then I'll say, what if?
Right.
And
well, it's so great, the stuff that you're hitting here. I mean, between the idea of imagination and collaboration and the themes of Into the Woods, it all ties together. I mean, it's just really great. I really appreciate it.
And technology doesn't replace it.
No, that is true. Well, we're going to turn to one of my favorite parts. Was I want to ask you the questions from the Pivot questionnaire. These 10 questions originally come from a French series called the Bouillon de Culture that was hosted by Bernard Pivot, but they're better known as the questions that James Lipton asks every guest at the end of his Inside Actor Studio television show. So the first of these 10 questions is, Jeff Saver, what is your favorite word?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask them, and I intentionally didn't look, think about it. I think off the top of my head, lovely.
Oh, and what is your least favorite word?
Should.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Art.
What turns you off?
We're not going to talk about politics, right?
It's a free country.
Negativity.
Okay. What is your favorite curse word?
Oh, fuck. Great word.
It is. It's great.
So much.
What sound or noise do you love?
Oh, that's easy. Laughter. Probably my daughter's laughter the most, but laughter. Yeah.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Oh, that's easy too. Probably from all the years in New York, the pneumatic drill.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Teaching history.
Okay.
I love history, yeah.
What profession would you not like to do?
Garbage sanitation department.
Yeah. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Come on down. Welcome. You've arrived.
I love that. So we're going to turn to some questions from our studio audience here.
I like
Uh,
that game. That's a nice game, Rob.
yes, that is a good one, isn't it? So
Yeah.
anyways, this question is from one of my graduate students, this is Lauren Houghton Gillis, and she says, can you talk about creating dance music with famous choreographers? And the follow-up to that is, what is a successful partnership? Like, are there choreographers that are helpful versus ones that aren't so helpful? She's a choreographer and wants to know what it's like working with the best.
I'm going to tell you one of the times that I didn't realize I was doing dance music. I should tell you too that John Kander was asked before he had written any theater scores. He was asked by Jerome Robbins because he was playing rehearsals for West Side Story. Would you like to do dance music for my next show? And he said yes immediately. He had never written dance music. He didn't know what he was doing. And that next show was Gypsy. So in case you didn't know, John Kander wrote the dance music to Gypsy. But he was working with Jerry Robbins, who was many things, but a genius. And I was asked to do some rehearsals with Mr. Fosse. I had done dancing on the road. And we didn't know each other all that well. And his regular guy, Gordon Harrell, wasn't available that day. And I came in, he was trying to work out a sequence. And Bob is great with rhythm. And when I say great, if he kicks off 5, 6, 7, 8, he means that tempo. I can't tell you how many choreographers or dance captains will go 5, 6, 7, 8, da, da, da. And it's like, he was the one that taught me the time is more than a magazine. But we were working on a moment, and it was kind of a soft shoe thing, and I was just improvising. And so my skills as somebody that could play by ear as well as read served me in that moment, because I was just kind of accompanying what Bob would do. And he goes, could you do a little stop time here? So I started doing that. Now, what'd you do? What did I do? And I took a piece of paper, like anything, and I started writing rhythms down. I had no staff paper, and just writing rhythms and maybe a harmonic thing and just something. And then we came back the next day, and I had thought about what I was working on with him in that hour. And then I was able to expand on it just because my brain was thinking about it and what he was trying to accomplish with these two gangsters. It turned out the show was to become Big Deal, which was Bob's last show. But it was a moment of what they were doing, and it was fun, and it was lighthearted. And so I was just improvising him. I realized that how specific he was and what little he said, what I understood about these characters, and the way he moved. And sometimes some dancers, and Bob was a dancer. And if he wasn't a dancer, he would have been a drummer, I'm sure of it. His time was so good, and his feeling for percussion, but just the way he moved. I wish I could tell you more than that, but the way his arms would do things and the way his eyes would light up, it inspired me to just be in that moment and improvise something that made sense. With other choreographers, they will talk about the same things that writers do, characters, and this is what we want to do. I was working with a wonderful choreographer I know as knew as a dancer first, Joanne Hunter, and we were working on a moment, and how do these people get from here to here, and what do they want, and what do they need, and why dance, and how do they move? And so you start talking about that and vocabulary, and then the next thing you realize is you've created a vocabulary in a world in the Depression and a certain time period, and the more specifics you come up with, the more you can realize that. So I like that kind of specificity from choreographers. It lets my imagination, it was like what I was saying before. What if she is doing that? And I said, well, what's she wearing? Because I don't want to do something if she can't move in it. And so I'm thinking about all these elements, so God is in the details. So
Right,
I like
of
that
course.
from choreographers. Yeah.
That's great. We have another question from Maddie Arneson. Thank you, Maddie.
Hi, buddy.
She writes, what is something that you find helpful that actors do? like in rehearsals or in the show process, that make things easier? Like, have you been inspired by something that actors have contributed? Like, what's the most helpful?
All the time. Uh, that they, I can tell you as a composer, I've written some pieces, and sometimes I will think of something, and sometimes the actor, I'll give you an extreme example, actor will change a rhythm of something just because it made more sense coming out of their mouth. And I said, of course that's the right rhythm. Why did I write that rhythm? That makes no sense. What you did is better. I'm going to do that. I'm going to give you none of the credit. No, I actually do. I thank them on the phone. And I don't feel so bad about it because I've seen the same thing happen with Sondheim. I wish I could remember what it was, but it was in Into the Woods, and Nancy Dussault came into the show as the witch, and she did something. She goes, "This rhythm here," and Steve said, "I can't believe I wrote that. That's wrong." And that was like a year and a half into the show or something. I don't know, but actors find. They find new material, and they think of phrasing and things that sometimes you never thought of. And sometimes it's not as good, so you go back to square one, you try to do this or whatever, but many times they think of things you never thought of, and it becomes a real collaborative process. I just love it. And also, if you've got a good actor, you find out immediately if your material works or not. And it's not because it ain't the actor. It's your material. I know actors feel so insecure about that, but they bring so much to the table. They're the most, in an audition, they're the most important people in the room, because it could be them. So they add enormously.
Well, leads me to another question, actually. Anonymous attendee asks, how did you learn to compose music before your education? I basically, like, did you learn from trial and error, or did you learn from classes, like as a composer?
None of it. I remember buying a little book. It was like one of those little rectangular things, no bigger than this, and it was just one of those things that you could literally buy in a pharmacy or something, except they would actually sell staff paper. And I was going on vacation with my parents, and I had pencils, and I remember getting ideas. I was like 9 or 10, 11 maybe, and we would sometimes vacation in Claremont, Florida, which is outside of Orlando. And back then it was kind of a hick town. And we'd go to Lake Mineola, and I'd see the dog riding, so I'd write a song, you know, Linda running through the beach, and that would be my piece. And I would write like a piano piece, you know, of what that felt like. So I didn't think about it. I just did it. So I'd love to tell you that it was some kind of education or whatever. Obviously, I had it in my ear. I can look at music and hear it, or I can hear it and write it. I can look at a score and feel it and hear it. So gratefully, that was a gift that I could do that. So my answer may be disappointing to you, because that's how it started. Sometimes I'll hear a color or something and just write down the color and see where it takes me. But then for 1 year in school, I was a composition major, and I went to a concert at Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra in Copeland. Aaron Copland was conducting his own works. And yeah, it was crazy. And I got to meet him afterwards, and I was completely starstruck. And I couldn't make words when I met him. And he did a beautiful thing. He asked me a question. He says, "Are you a composer?" And I said, "I am." "What have you written?" He started asking me questions, and I came out of my fear. And I said, "I'm working on a string quartet." He goes, "Oh, would you send it to me?" And I'm thinking, really? Are you kidding? Aaron Copland is asking me if I could send this string quartet. Sure, when I finish it. And I did. And he wrote comments back. And he said things like, "This idea is great. You're too many ideas here. See if you can make the most out of this one idea." And I realized later on it was not so different than theater, of an economy. and going a long way on something. And the theater ironically brought me back to classical music and pop music to make the most. You can make a lick, do 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 do, Day Tripper by the Beatles, and you know they use that one lick to unify a composition. Likewise, Beethoven could write da, 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 and just that one idea takes you through an entire movement of without being repetitive. And Sondheim does it in Sunday in the Park with George.
Right.
And I realized that if you give the I don't know, those ideas eventually did it, but I wasn't terribly organized about it when I started. I was just doing it. I was reading music before I was reading words, so I'm told. I don't remember that, but that's what my mother, father says.
She's very proud of her boy.
May she rest in peace. I hope so.
So this has been super great. I'm going to leave with one last question here. And this is from Maya. What is your inspiration for getting up every day to work?
Sometimes not so much.
That's okay too.
On the best of days, because you know that's actually a very good question, especially today.
Sure.
Because it's very easy to feel heavy in our hearts. But maybe sometimes I leave myself a question, like I'll go to sleep and I'll think something like, what can I make today? What can I, you know, and maybe I get an idea of something that I can make, and then I can put some notes on the page. I have this idea for maybe a collaboration, something that, what can I make? And in a way, if you're making, then you're giving because you're sharing. And it's what we do in the theater. We share. It's kind of like, that's what teaching is. I mean, teaching is the greatest thing. I've had such great teachers, but really all it is sharing. It's like, I know you think that you said you didn't like caramel, but try this thing. And say, you got to try this thing. And it's just, if you love something and you're passionate about it, if you share it, maybe somebody else will go for it. But maybe just getting up in the morning and say, you know, what can we make today? What can we put into the world? You know, what positive thing can we put into the world? Because let's face it, when can we not use something positive? And maybe in closing, if that's the last question, I can tie it in with a final lyric by Steve Sondheim in Sunny in the Park with George, when he says, anything you do, let it come from you, then it will be new. Give us more to see. And maybe that's our responsibility as human beings. We don't have to be composers, but maybe, you know, I'm going to make, I've never made eggplant, and I'm going to figure out how to make eggplant and not kill someone today, you know, with it. But just make something, do something. And whatever that is, it's enough. I think we also have to be very gentle with ourselves right now, because some days we're going to get up, Maya, and we're not going to want to do something, and that's okay. I think there's, it's a really hard time right now. And so there's something, but be gentle with yourselves and be patient with yourselves, because every day can't be finishing the hat. And that's okay, because when you're ready and when it does happen, all of a sudden, isn't that exciting? And the feeling that you get when you've made something is like, well, it's, you just want to show somebody, Rob, you got to hear this song I wrote. You got to hear this song. It was like, oh, I made eggplant and I didn't kill anyone. That was a good day, you know. So I don't know if that is, just you try your best. What can I make today? Put something positive into the world, and or just do it for your sister or your brother or your father or mother or your friend. By doing it that way, I believe it's microcosm, macrocosm. You do take care of your home, we'll take care of the world, one home at a time, one person at a time, and it's enough.
These have been amazing inspirational words, Jeff. I'm so lucky to have you here today, and I count myself very lucky to have you in my life for these past 30 years. So I really appreciate you.
Well,
Big virtual claps for
I,
everything.
I have to say that those kids are so lucky to have you. I am so jealous. I miss you terribly, and you're such a good man. And I hope we get to do something together again, other than Melba Moore, but we'll leave them with that gussing.
You had to bring up Melba Moore.
Well, now they're going to want to know, right? See,
They will. I'll tell them later.
You always leave them some wanting more, right?
Well, that's right. Well, if John and Fred taught you anything, that's definitely what it was.
Thank you for having me, friend.
Great. So the SDSU Studio Series returns on Friday, April 17th at 4 p.m. Eastern with composer and music director Georgia Stitt. She just released a new album. You should all download it immediately. It is wonderful. Sutton Foster sings a track called Stop that is out of this world. The series continues next Monday with guest Andrew Lippa and continues Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at the same time until May 6th. See our website for details, SDSU Studio Series.wordpress.com. Thank you all for being here. Bye.